Hello there, welcome to Saber Gaming, where we always take the high ground. With Wrestlemania right around the corner and WWE 2K25 just released, wrestling games are on the forefront of everyone's mind. But way back before we had the fantastic modern games we have today, a certain handheld unleashed a game that was still pretty interesting. Welcome to our retro review of WWF Superstars. Back in 1991, before games like the SmackDown series and the WWE 2K series were released, WWF Superstars was released in 1991, and it was released across a number of consoles, but it's the Game Boy version we're looking at today. This game was given a fair bit of fanfare, and it was advertised by some of the WWE's biggest stars at the time. But the game itself, well, let's take a look at it. The roster of characters available was modest by today's standards, but 5 characters were still pretty good. Mr. Perfect, the Ultimate Warrior of course, who had been used for the promotion, the Immortal Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage and Ted DiBiase were the 5 available, and it's fair to say these were amongst the most popular at the time. As the selection screen, all of them had their own iconic music, apart from Ted DiBiase, who strangely was given a weird original tune. The only match types available were one with either no time limit, 5-minute or 10-minute time limit, before going straight into the one game mode where you select your character and work your way through everybody else. Before the fight begins, we get these cool little interviews where your character is seen talking and goading their opponent. There is one generic phrase per character and one which is customized specifically for their opponent. This was a cool little inclusion and something we've not really seen in the wrestling game since, which is a shame. There's no entrances, the fighters just begin right in the ring, but that was kinda standard at the time. Once the match begins, we do see the limitations of the Nintendo Game Boy. However, I would say that despite the complete green screen and the limited basic layout of the ring, the actual wrestlers themselves look pretty decent. I can certainly tell which one is which, and I always could. The combat is pretty basic. They all have the same moves, with a mixture of grapples, strikes, attacks when grounded, headlocks, we see suplex, body slams, and you can even scale to the top rope and deliver an elbow or knee drop from the top. Even after the match, there's something pretty cool with the guest appearance of Vince McMahon talking about the fight before we move on to the next round. Whilst most of the combat takes place in the ring, you can slam your opponent to the outside when we get a different view of the arena and ring itself. It's the only different view you're going to see, but it's still pretty cool. It allows you to fight outside, potentially get counted out, but you can still fight inside the ring from that perspective for a few seconds before the game cuts back to the standard view. So, how was this game viewed when it was released? It's probably fair to say average, which is not too surprising when it comes to wrestling games. Nintendo Power Magazine, for example, gave it a 2.9 out of 5, a really weird rating in my opinion, but anyway, most games magazines gave it something similar, and I kind of understand why. The reality was, if you played this simply as a game for game's sake, it probably wouldn't be as good as if you're a wrestling fan. Let's be honest, most sports titles are going to be ranked based on how much you enjoy the sport. As a huge wrestling fan back in 1991, I was super excited to be able to play as some of my favourite wrestlers. The 3 biggest names in professional wrestling at this time were Macho Man Randy Savage, the Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan. They were all there. Mr. Perfect and the $1 Million Man gave us some credible heels to fight against. Realistically, if I was going to pick 5 wrestlers, I wouldn't have picked much different to the roster they gave us. By the standards of the Nintendo Game Boy, I actually thought the graphics were fine. As I mentioned, I could tell who all the wrestlers were, and I enjoyed playing as them. The moveset, whilst fairly limited by modern standards, was good. I got to do power slams, suplexes, drop kicks, elbows, knees, punches, kicks, headlocks, and even to go outside the ring and fight, that was pretty cool. And the pre and post match interviews and commentary really gave it an authentic feel. So how does it hold up to modern scrutiny? Well, going back to play this one again now, using an emulator unfortunately, I thought this was still a lot of fun. Look, it's simplistic. It's one game mode, you play through, you have 4 fights, and you win. That's the end. But what do you expect? The Nintendo Game Boy was a handheld console that didn't allow you to save, you couldn't continue your progress. It had to be short to give mobile gamers a chance to actually complete the thing. The music was cool enough, getting to hear 8-bit versions of some of those iconic tunes was great, even if Ted DiBiase's was weirdly different. I don't understand why that was the case. It was music they owned. The one other piece of music which is used for the loading screen and the actual in-ring combat is a really catchy tune, and the moment I started playing it again I instantly remembered it. Looking back, I probably would have liked the option of having a one-player game, just a single fight mode where I could pick whether I wanted it to have countouts or a few other bits, but that's probably being a bit picky, and we would see new game modes added to the sequel. Whilst I hadn't thought about it at the time, looking back now when I completed this game, seeing the end screen is simply just a portrait of my character smiling at me, that was kind of anticlimactic. I would have liked to have seen them at least holding the title belt or have champion written underneath it, but it's a minor gripe. Going back to play this game again, there's a couple of factors that are massive impactors on how much I enjoyed it. First of all, I love wrestling games, I always have, and I'm still a big fan of all of these wrestlers. Also, there's a massive nostalgia factor in it too. I think if I'm trying to be really fair, I'd have to rate this a 6.5 out of 10. That might even be a little bit complimentary, but I also think giving it anything less would be a little bit unfair on it given the restrictions and what was actually expected of the Nintendo Game Boy at the time. Bear in mind, you didn't get that much different on 16-bit and 8-bit consoles back then. So overall, this was a decent little wrestling game, and if you do like your retro wrestling games, it's definitely one that's worth going back and checking out now. But what do you think? Is this one I'm being a little bit too harsh on, or I'm being too kind? What's your favourite wrestling game, and especially if you've got a retro one? Comment below, let me know. And until next time, take the high ground.